going on, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Dish. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host on the men's side, Logan Shanks, and the women guys. I'll have you guys introduce yourselves.
What's up, guys? Pavel Markovic back for the Daily Dish.
And Brett Twellmeyer, another sports reporter for the women's basketball team.
Sweet. We got a lot to talk about this week. Men's side had a pretty big tournament, obviously not the result they were looking for. And then the women's side went on the road, dropped 2 games, same as the men's. So, I mean, first of all, with the men's games, I feel like we saw kind of the whole spectrum of what we could see from basketball.
Yeah, I mean, you saw them, in that Texas A&M game, just most recent in my memory. They got a big lead in the first half. It seemed like they couldn't miss a shot. It seemed like the opposite for Texas A&M. In other games, they're fighting back. Really, that was kind of the story for VCU and Virginia Tech. And you said it really well. You kind of saw everything that could go wrong in each basketball game, whether it was couldn't hit their free throws, couldn't hit their threes, couldn't get foul calls when they were just putting up lazy shots in the paint. And you really just kind of saw a full spectrum of what can get you beat in a basketball game. And honestly, it's probably good for them to get that out of the way, if they want to be able to compete in this conference that, for the most part, has not missed a beat in their tournaments.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of nice to see that they had 3 very different outcomes. Obviously, they started really, really slow against VCU, kind of similar to that Pittsburgh game, and they were able to come back, but then against Virginia Tech, obviously they weren't. And then you see them blow a over 20-point lead against Texas A&M. So they really did face kind of everything they could have, and it's almost better to see that now and for them to still get a win in that tournament as opposed to seeing that later deep into conference play when that will actually matter.
Right. And, TJ talked about it a lot. Most who we talked to at media availability this week, they were confident in, being able to turn things around. And you're going to get that from every team. But I like that TJ was pretty honest. He said, honestly, it kind of looked like they were taking low effort shots and that it wasn't really there. And you saw that just from watching it at home. It seemed like where they were going into the paint, which they've been traditionally really good at this season, or they were dishing it out to Milan or Curtis Jones or whoever. They just couldn't really take the right shot. And I think that's really what hurt them overall in those 3 games.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the free throw shooting, but I think, honestly, the 3-point shooting, I know that's something that Iowa State doesn't tend to kind of hang their hat on. On the men's side, it's, they tend to, or at least this year, it's been more so getting points in the paint. Mm-hmm. But it really did seem like they needed some threes, or at least some momentum going, especially late in that Texas A&M game where they're only trailing by like 2 points, 1 point. They're holding a lead through most of the game. 1 3 probably would have kept that momentum going into the end, but they just couldn't get anything going.
Exactly. I mean, there were just sometimes they needed a free throw to fall, or they needed a huge 3 to not even just get them back in the game, but to cut it from maybe an 8-point deficit to a 5 or whatever the case may be. And they just never really were able to step up and do that. And it solely it's on everyone on the team. There's no really one person that you can look at that kind of blew the game or blew a game each time. It's just something that they're going to have to work on. Honestly, I still have a lot of optimism for the team because I think they know what they need to fix, and it's just, again, establishing that presence in the paint. But, you got to look at the 3-point shooting, which we thought this was going to be one of the better 3-point shooting teams since TJ came here, and that really wasn't the case when they went to Orlando.
Mm-hmm. And then going maybe the 3-point shooting, obviously kind of a small issue, but I think the free throw shooting too was something that was a little glaring. I think, you looked at some of those games where, they hit a few more of those free throws. They're probably still in those games. Mm-hmm. I know that TJ's teams don't tend to, I guess, get to the line as much or really bank off free throws, but it seems like this team is getting to the line more, but they're just not making the most of their opportunities, which was kind of what TJ brought up at the press conference. He's like, when he came out, he's just like, yep, we're just working on free throws. That's why it's taking so long. Yeah,
and you haven't really seen guards in TJ Ottsberg offense at Iowa State that has really just worked their way into paint. I think they have a great tandem in Taman and Keyshawn. Mm-hmm. But again, it's just all about hitting those free throws. And honestly, a couple of their shots that they did put up, when it looks like they're just trying to get fouls called on them, and that's just not, or draw fouls, and that's just wasn't the case throughout every game. And ultimately, I think that's what really hurt them, is when you're trying to establish your presence in the paint, which they've done well outside of those 3 games, it really hurts you along the run, because then you're like, okay, well, we have to kick it out to a 3. And when those aren't falling either, you don't have anywhere to turn to. And the defense was, really good throughout each game. I think, there's a couple spots that they have to improve on, maybe giving up open threes. I think they did that a couple too many times. But overall, I think it's really just working on the offense for these next couple of games.
Mm-hmm. And we'll dive more into the defense in a bit when we kind of talk about what went right during those tournaments or those tournament games. I mean, there was quite a bit that did go right. It wasn't just all bad. It wasn't just the 2 losses. Those were pretty good losses, to be honest. But we'll move more into the women's side of things, just kind of looking at, they also had a similar experience on the road as the men.
Yeah, the women's team traveled to Las Vegas during Thanksgiving break, and they first faced Vanderbilt, and that was a tough game, honestly, to say. Once again, it looked very much like the Drake game, Brett. Honestly, they scored 4 points in the second quarter, and then all of a sudden they just ramp it up in the third quarter, but at the end of the day, it didn't work out for them.
Yeah, I would say the women have really been a up and down type of team. They've had moments where they can score the ball. They've had moments where they can't score the ball. They've shown that they can be a good team, and that they're still learning in a lot of areas of the game.
100%, yeah. And then obviously they went to Syracuse the next day to try and get a bounce back win there, and obviously it didn't work out. What do you think, Brett?
Yeah, well, the first half went really well. Tied after the first quarter, tied in the halftime, but then that time, the third quarter, the fourth quarter, just didn't really have enough to get ahead and just kind of fell behind, and that was it for Iowa State in that one.
Yeah. Luckily, but before the tournament, Iowa State took on Southern, and they got a win on that after following the Drake loss, which is nice to see. What do you think on that, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, seeing it in person, they were shooting the ball so well in the first half. Over 50% from the field, over 50% from 3, and they built up like a 20-point lead in the halftime and just kind of rode that to the end, and it was definitely good to see. I also want to give a big shout-out to Kelsey Jones getting her first start in that game. She played really well.
And you kind of talk about the almost like some quarters were going well, kind of similar to the men, where they couldn't really string together, I guess, a full game. Mm-hmm. When shots were falling, though, which it does seem like this team can hit shots. I mean, this team, that women's team, does actually look pretty talented. I
agree, yeah. I mean, obviously, the second quarter they have to have fixed. They even talked about that in practice. It's just, can they be that third quarter team? They bring that energy to the rest of the game, not just the third quarter and the second half. They have to start off hot in the first half to keep it close within games. Yeah, just keeping the consistency up is going to be key. Keeping the energy. That's something that Addie Brown talked to us about in the week, and I think that they showed that in their most recent game against St. Thomas. Huge bounce back game on the road there, winning by over 40 points. What did you see from that one, Pavle? Oh, St. Thomas game, it was amazing to see. Obviously capped off by the record that they set with the NCAA, the 900th consecutive game with a three-pointer, which is unbelievable. It went all the way back from to 1995. It's been going on, so it's been a pretty big record for them. Pretty much like all of Bill Finley's coaching career here at Iowa State. Basically, yeah. And obviously from the game, too, Kelsey Jones had a nice game as a starter. She finished with 17 points as the team high. And four Cyclones ended up in over double figures, which is nice to see. And everyone got the chance to play in that game, too, since with a dominating 41-point win. I think what's really kind of helped out the women's team is making the switch with Audie starting over Isnell now, and then who is it? Kelsey getting the start over. Was it Hannah starting before her? It was Ariana Jackson. Okay, Ariana Jackson. So I think making that switch has really helped them out. I agree with what Bill was trying to do at the beginning of the year, which was you want to put the seniors in there, or at least with Isnell, someone with a little bit more experience at the collegiate level, or at least at a higher level of basketball. And I think what you've really seen out of Audie is that she's a playmaker. I mean, she can hit shots. She gets boards. I think really what Isnell has really done well is establish, her defensive presence and getting the boards, which is nice. But what Iowa State, at least for the women, and I guess both teams really, but for the women specifically, they've kind of lacked offense in parts, especially in that Drake game when you hit no shots in the second quarter. I think having Audie in there, she may not, push the pace very well, but she's a
she's had some dominant games, especially, you know, when she's able to get into the paint and just really use her size and, you know, everything like that to her advantage. So, you know, making that switch has been really important for them. And I think that's kind of what's helped them make that turnaround. Again, I know it was against St. Thomas, but, you know, they got some pretty solid wins outside of just losing those 2 games on the road, or I guess at a neutral site.
Mm-hmm. And is it, you know, obviously the team hasn't really had a solid win against a Power 5 opponent, but was it kind of just like an uptick in competition when they got on the road against obviously Vanderbilt and Syracuse, where maybe the young team wasn't as prepared?
Yeah, I would say so. That's kind of what Bill Finley talked to us about. He basically just said it's nice to see how they can stack up against that type of competition. The players talked about it too, knowing that this is the type of teams that we're going to be playing later in the season. So getting it out of the way now, knowing what you need to fix going into Big 12 play is really important.
Yeah, I agree. Having these Power 5 opponents early really helps, and it just helps it ramp up the competition. You know, like these non-con Power 5 teams, like kind of like make it a little easier for them, I guess I'd say. But obviously, it'll help obviously come Big 12 play when they have to really start like ramping it up and getting into it.
And really, these early season tournaments, that's kind of what they should be used for, is to kind of figure out what's not working. You should be able to roll through your first couple games in the non-conference, especially when you're playing them at home. But I think, you know, it was kind of foolish of me personally to think that Iowa State was going to make it like they had a sole spot in the championship game, because I was just looking at last year and thinking, oh, well, they made it all the way to, you know, they beat North Carolina and whatnot. But what I forget is that team, outside of transfers from St. Bonaventure, Oshuni, and Jaron Holmes, that most of that team had been there the year before, the first year of TJ Altsberger. And I think what's kind of hurt them now is they're still, one, trying to figure out offense, but they're trying to figure out offense with new players that offer, you know, skills that haven't really been here at Iowa State. I think the big thing is Keyshawn pushing the ball into the paint, and, you know, Kurt being able to be that outside shooter for Iowa State that they haven't really had. So I think it just needs to be used as learning material, especially with the amount of youth and new guys that they have on the team.
I think I was looking at the tournament kind of with rose-colored glasses, just because I remember watching that North Carolina game last year and being like, oh, Iowa State in tournaments is just going to be really good. I mean, they took down the number 1 team in the country and then played the team that was about to be the national champions pretty closely. So I kind of went into this tournament thinking, oh, VCU is going to be pretty easy game. Turned out it wasn't. And then Virginia Tech was going to be, you know, on paper, a win for Iowa State. I think the only team I was a little worried about was Texas A&M, which, I mean, obviously getting up by 21 and dropping that lead is kind of rough, but I did kind of expect them not to win that, so it was kind of surprising when they did have that big of a lead.
And when they got that lead, that was kind of the best that they had looked. I mean, obviously, that was the best they had looked in that tournament. They were hitting shots and, you know, playing great defense, holding Texas A&M, you know, to shots falling just here and there. And I think, you know, that's obviously what they want to see more of. But that's what they need to focus on. They need to focus on what went right there and not went wrong the entire game. And you can just take what went wrong and with what went right, which I think was just finding open shooters and, you know, creating that dominant presence in the paint that they did have in moments in the tournament, and just kind of finding out ways to create that more often, especially with a couple games that you have coming up, especially that Cyhawk game, which everyone has marked on their calendar. And if you don't perform well in that game, it's going to be rough the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's for sure. You got me a little confused with the what went right, what went wrong talk, but
just throwing a bunch of what's and a bunch of right and wrong around there, so I don't blame you.
Yeah, but I think the big takeaway for me from that Texas A&M game was, I think going into it, Texas A&M was still kind of trying to find their identity. They had lost probably 2 of their top 3 players. Obviously, I would say Taylor's still their number 1 player, one of the top point guards in the country, but losing, I want to say Coleman, he's one of the best players in the SEC currently, and then losing Radford too. I think they were just kind of like without a lot of offensive presence, especially since Taylor plays so well with Radford on the court. It was just kind of like nothing was working for them. And I think Iowa State kind of just took advantage of that early on. But then I think after a bit, they started figuring out what was working, who was going to be the playmakers, and I think it just happened that Texas A&M was just the better team at a point.
And I think in any game, really, when you get up like that and then you see a team just come back when they're down 21 at a neutral site, I would assume that Iowa State was just, shocked. They think that everything was going right for them. All right, they dropped that game against Virginia Tech, get a big top 25, top 15 win against Texas A&M, and they just struggled to find anything going on in the second half, especially from three-point land. And, like you said earlier, there were times that they were inching back in, making it, like an 8-point game. And I think it was even close to realistically like a 5 or a 3-point game with like 4 or 5 minutes left, whatever the case was. But regardless, you have to hold on to leads like that. You're up 21, you're forcing a good team into, tough shots, not, into a bad territory, and they got to be able to take advantage of that. But it is kind of promising to know that they can compete against these Power 5 teams. It's just, again, what I mentioned, and I'll try and make it a little bit more clear, getting the things right more often than getting those things wrong that they found themselves in more often, not in those 3 tournament games.
Yeah, and I think that was almost true, too, with the women's team. It's just maybe the finishing ability of both of the teams. I think Iowa State on the men's side, we saw they almost didn't finish that game against VCU, and then they didn't finish the game against Virginia Tech. And, they weren't even in the second half against Texas A&M. On the other side, the women's team was tied with Syracuse, right, at the half, and then you just can't close it out. It kind of just seems like maybe that's Iowa State basketball on both sides now.
Yeah, I think, looking at the Syracuse game, it was there for sure in the first half. You look at the players too. Audie Crooks gets 23 points in her first start, which is incredible. And the fact that she's been able to score the ball and be this force already for Iowa State is huge for them. But also Addie Brown, double figures, points and rebounds, her first double-double of the season. So that's huge too, that the freshmen are finally able to, start playing at a high level, and hopefully that can start to turn into some wins for the Cyclones.
I agree also, Brad. In the Syracuse game, obviously you mentioned Audie and Addie, but then you look at the rest of the team, nobody else reached double figures. Like Kelsey Jones even had a bad game because she didn't score any points. But yeah, it just really comes down, like you said, consistency, and like we need to, and they started to spread the ball around more, which has been good for them. But then also I wanted to talk about one issue that they had during the tournament, which was turnovers.
Yes.
They had a double-digit turnovers in each game, and it has been a glaring issue for them.
Yeah, every game, including those 2 tournament games, there's been over 14 turnovers. So it's a huge issue. It needs to get solved sooner rather than later. So it's got to get fixed.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a young team. You're going to have these young growing experiences with the turnovers. But yeah, even Bill mentioned it in press conference, turnovers need to be cleaned up. But also I'm going to talk about free throws, because also they struggled from the line as of late. Hitting these key free throws also helps them maybe come back and beat Syracuse or even Vanderbilt. These key free throws have just been key, and they just have not been able to fall. Yeah,
it's not just that the free throws aren't falling. It's just that they're not able to get to the line either. You look at the Syracuse game, Audie Crooks shoots 9 free throws, and everyone else, 4? Everyone needs to start getting to the line, really. It can't just be Audie Crooks down low, because relying on just one player to make every free throw is not going to help you at all.
Yeah, Coach Fenley obviously talked about that with us at practice. He knows the turnovers are an issue, but he's focusing on getting his team more to the free throw line, which could win them some games down the stretch.
It does kind of sound like you guys are talking about men's basketball too, in a way. I know that obviously that's been a big, focus from TJ this season, has just been getting to the free throw line. But also you talk about the turnovers, and I think in that A&M game, it was just, I feel like they lost the turnover battle just a lot in that second half, especially just bad passes, bad looks. I don't want to name names, but some people were just kind of struggling with keeping that ball safe.
And that's something you haven't really seen in the TJ Ottsberger era, is losing the turnover battle. I mean, even in games that they've lost, they've usually done a good job of getting a steal or forcing them, either a shot clock violation or a bad pass, whatever the case may be. And kind of like you said, they just couldn't really win the turnover battle in that second half against A&M, which really held them from, getting that lead back and or keeping it going, even because they went into halftime, they were up 10. I mean, there was, I don't remember how much time was left in the first half, but you're up 21 and then they cut it, but you're still up 10. You think, all right, you can get things right going into the second half, and really just came out in the second half slow. And when you come out slow in the second half and give up a big lead, you force a couple unwarranted turnovers, and like you said, not going to name names here, but just some sloppy passing or just not really reading the floor right. I mean, that's going to get you into some tough spots, and they saw that a lot, really in every game. I mean, there was many times in the tournament when they just couldn't get something right offensively, and losing that turnover battle is obviously not going to help you out.
Mm-hmm. And then I feel like what went right in that first half was they were actually winning the turnover battle. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at Wade Taylor, who was averaging over 20 points a game, wasn't able to get a score for probably the first 10 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. And that was because, I mean, they were playing careful, they weren't fouling him, mm-hmm. and they were turning the ball over from him. I think he was probably leading the team in turnovers, which is very rare for him, mm-hmm. And then along with that, he wasn't getting to the free throw line, which he does so often. So I think that combination of stuff, they were locking down A&M at every turn, and then it just kind of seemed like A&M had figured out what was going on. They stopped turning the ball over. They started making Iowa State make sloppy passes, make sloppy plays, and then you see the turnover just flip, and I think that was probably what kind of caused that comeback. Enough with the tournament talk, past game talk. I think the big thing that I noticed was there were some standout players that I think we didn't really expect mm-hmm. to be standouts going into it. Obviously, we could sit here and talk about Taman Lipsey all day long. Yeah, he's obviously proven that he's one of the top point guards in the country, and that was no different in Orlando. Mm-hmm. But I think there were some guys that were really beneficial to maybe bringing the games closer than they might have been. Yeah, I mean, and one of those guys that sticks out for me, and he's really been a consistent guy right there with Taman this whole season, is Rob Jones. A lot of people criticize Rob Jones not only offensively but also defensively last season, and I think he's made a huge leap. Defensively, he has honestly proven that he can guard anyone, really. Mm-hmm. Any size, whether it's a guard at the top of the key or someone down in the post. I think he's played really great defensively. He's been up there with Trey King for rebounds. I mean, Trey King is more of an aggressive rebounder, but Rob Jones is it never feels like a play is going to be dead with him out there, or a ball, is going to go the other way for Iowa State. And then also offensively, he's taken some really good shots. Most of his shots are in the paint, but it's not just a dunk. He's taken, like one arm, putting it up, floaters, but he's been doing a really good job of that. And I think he's kind of been the unsung hero of someone that has also been asked to be in the starting lineup now with Hassan Ward being out. And I think he's filled that role pretty well on both sides of the ball. Mm-hmm. I think he had some pretty tough assignments too mm-hmm. in those 3 games. Yep. There was quite a few guys that outsized him, out skill setted him. Mm-hmm. I want to say, like, they were just better players, but yet he still played a really solid game. Mm-hmm. And I think especially I noticed in that VCU game, whenever Iowa State was slipping a little too far out of reach, Rob Jones would have a very impactful play. It'd either be just like a mid-range just layup, mm-hmm. or he'd just power his way into the paint, and you could just tell the tone shifted in those games every time he got a score. I think, we heard a lot about Hassan in the offseason, but also what Rob has really done to change is he's been the leader. He's been a guy that, there's a lot of new people on this team, new faces, whether it's freshmen or transfers. And I think he's gone out there every game and shown that, he's ready to make this last year meaningful to him and to the people at Iowa State. So I give a lot of credit to him for
not only, you know, playing well off the bench in the first couple of games, but now stepping into the starting lineup. And like you said, taking care of the tough assignments that he's had, and also being a solid presence in the paint for Iowa State, whether that means giving a good pass to kick out or just backing down guys, which in the last couple of years, he has not really done a great job of backing people down, especially when he's had the size advantage. But I think he's really had a huge leap in this last offseason, and it's shown in these first couple of games.
And I kind of want to talk about somebody who might not have been on the radar of too many people. I know I really wanted Keyshawn to, you know, he's obviously my breakout player. I wanted him to do better in those second 2 games after that VCU game, because he did so well in that VCU game. But I think the guy who really stepped up in the last 2 games, who really kind of kept it close at times, was Jackson Pavletsky, one of your top guys. But he had like significant minutes in pretty much every game in Orlando, which was kind of good to see. But we also kind of forget that he was a star player on Wofford, and he is a scorer. He's like really good with the ball, and he can make shots too. There was, I think, in that, I want to say that A&M game, he was hitting threes too, and he was just like being impactful all over the court.
I think he loves playing basketball. I know it's kind of easy to say, but whenever he gets out there, he was playing great defense. I mean, he was sizing some people up. If you know, I don't know if it shows on the TV, but he's a little undersized for a guard, which might have been why, you know, he wasn't really sought after as a recruit. But you've seen it. He can size anyone up, and he was forcing turnovers and guys into bad shots. And like you said, he is a scoring threat, someone that they have to worry about. And, you know, shout out to him for stepping up, coming off the bench. It was kind of interesting to see because you weren't really seeing a lot of him in the non-conference games. But then when it gets into, you know, Power 5 teams, or, you know, especially in that A&M game, he's playing minutes and really good minutes. And it's kind of shown why, you know, Iowa State has had a really good mindset of getting good guys in the transfer portal, or rather of they know which guys to go after, and signing a guy like Pavletsky and having him make the switch over to Iowa State has been pretty smooth for him, especially in those last couple of games. And I personally, as someone that's been high on him since the start of the season, am excited to see what he does in these next few games if he just keeps improving.
Yeah, I was one on the boat where I wasn't sure how he would transition to just a faster paced game, and seeing him not use that much in non-con made me a little bit worried about his progress. But obviously he's done something really well in practice to go out there and compete against these Power 5 opponents and actually look really good. And I think that's going to be promising going into Big 12 play. I know that we talked about him being undersized when he first stepped out there, and he still looks pretty small, but I mean, he also plays like he's not undersized. I mean, that almost is an advantage for him because he's able to slip into spots that most people can't, and he can get buckets from pretty much anywhere. And I think that's probably something that he can bring, just this like spark to the lineup. Yeah. Which Rob Jones also does. So 2 spark guys really came alive in Orlando.
You gotta love it.
Yep. It's just real exciting. And then going into the women's side, who were kind of the standout players in those, especially the first 2 games against Power 5 opponents?
Yeah, I'd probably go ahead and say Addie Brown. You know, she just kind of comes onto the scene as a freshman, maybe a little shadowed because of the presence that Audie Crooks and Kelsey Jones present. But, I mean, she's out there scoring points. She's out there getting rebounds, getting assists. She's done well on every account of the game so far, and I think that she's definitely proven herself to be a driving force of this team now and heading into Big 12 play.
I agree with Addie Brown too, but obviously we have to go back to Audie Crooks. I mean, she's worked her way into the starting lineup already, beating out Isnell Nadabu, and it's amazing to see what she's bringing to the team. She just big presence in the paint, always gets to the line. The one thing she could work on is her free throws. I mean, she went 3 for 9 in the game against Syracuse, which could have helped in that game, but regardless, like, she's been putting up a lot of points for Iowa State, and she's really been a big presence in us and them winning.
Yeah, I think you got to really look at the freshmen as a whole, too. I mean, their presence is going to be felt this year and every year that they're here at Iowa State. Yeah,
I think that's also true on the men's side. There's a lot of impactful freshmen. I mean, Obviously, Milan has been just a big name throughout the season, but we kind of talk about the people who did well, and I don't want to bash on some of the other people, but I think there were some people who saw maybe some slight struggles in Orlando. Obviously, some of the newcomers still getting used to the team as a whole.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up Milan, but what I kind of feel bad for him is that he was really someone that was forced to take a lot of those three-point shots that didn't fall. You saw that especially in Virginia Tech and Texas A&M. I don't really think it was that he was struggling there. I think it really was that he was forced to take shots that, whether his feet weren't set or it just wasn't a good look for him. And that's kind of, hopefully they can just kind of push that back and move forward back. Okay, we don't need Milan to attempt 10 plus three-pointers a game. He's more, when he can find his own shot, that's when he has been able to find success from there.
And I think he did look pretty good throughout the tournament. I'm not going to say he really struggled that much. I think at times his shots were falling short, but obviously they're kind of expecting a lot from him. But he was also like a really impactful player too, especially late in that Texas A&M game. He kind of helped them keep it close, and I mean his last second shot there against Texas A&M, like I don't know how that even went.
That was crazy. I had to go back and watch that a couple times to, I was like, did he really just hit that?
Yeah, and yeah, they were talking about him stepping out. I'm like, what if we just talk about the shot? That is crazy.
But you got guys like Milan that, for him just kind of took a couple too many threes. And I want to move over to the guards that I think, they've really found a lot of, they found success with pushing the ball into the paint and getting fouls called. But it's almost, again, like when the shots aren't going down, you feel like you have to, not exactly be the hero, but you want to be the guy that kind of is the spark plug. And I think what was kind of their detriment is, back to what I was saying earlier, is taking those lazy shots and not exactly going for the bucket, but going for the foul call. And you can't always do that. You can't always just rely on getting called for a foul and getting some luck at the line. And really, when they were at the line, like we said, was not going well.
Yeah. And you talk about those guards. Is there anyone in particular that stood out as your player that maybe needs to kind of pick up the pace here going forward, especially with the Hawkeye game coming up? Who needs to kind of work on some stuff?
Well, you're not really giving me many options here, and I know who you're alluding to, and I don't want to give him too much hate, but Curtis Jones has not had the greatest start from beyond the arc. And again, I think it's another guy where it's kind of been the opposite for him from Milan, where he is taking his own shots that aren't really falling. But I feel like when they've been able to design plays to get him shots, that has really what's helped him. And again, I think sometimes maybe for some people it may be trying to be that spark plug, and I know he is wanting to be that guy for this team that is that three-point shooter outside of Milan. And you talked to him at media availability this week. I'm not really sure what all he said, but it sounds like they are going to try to, just get the three-point shots down and stick back to what they were doing, which was successful, was getting, shots up in the paint more.
And I think, obviously, Kurt has a pretty solid resume. I mean, he is historically a good three-point shooter. I think what we've seen is just he's started the season on a slump. I think it's something that I really want to say will get better as time goes on. I don't think it's anything to kind of worry too much about. I know there were definitely times in the tournament where I was just like, really wish he would have hit this open three, but I think at some point it does end up being a rhythm thing, which TJ did talk about. I think he kind of just takes too tough of shots early on. Maybe he's forced into them. Maybe he just is trying to get something going for the team. But taking those tough shots and not seeing them fall almost makes it think that you can't make the open shots. And then once the open shots aren't falling, no shots are falling. And I think he's just kind of almost in his own head in a way. And that's kind of what he talked about. And I think he's definitely sitting down to figure it out with his coaches, just what to do.
And I looked back at his last year at Buffalo, and he didn't really start out great for the season. There's a lot of 1 for 5, 1 for 4, whatever the case was. And you said something he talked about when we got done at media availability this week was he says he needs to follow through with his shots more. And as a shooter, that's a big thing. I mean, you'll see the greats like Steph Curry, they need to just they've talked about following through with your shot and whatnot. And I think that's just a big thing. And again, you're going back to using this tournament as a learning, you learn from this tournament so that you can get better, especially with the games that you have coming up. And like you said, I want to say that Kurt does get better because historically he has been a great 3-point shooter, or at least a adequate 3-point shooter. And I think that's really all Iowa State needs is just 2 solid 3-point shooters in Milan and Curtis, and then Taman and Keyshawn to complement them. And I think this can end up being at least, if not a below average, at least 3-point shooting team, but maybe even a subpar team that, can test you from outside. Because really that's what they need to establish is a presence outside instead of just having to constantly work your shots inside.
Mm-hmm. And I think obviously it's a good sign that he's kind of like focusing on that. He did admit that, like the shots aren't falling. That's an issue. He knew what was working in the past, and he's going to kind of go back to that. He was looking at his mechanics and figuring out what was going wrong there. So obviously he knows what he needs to fix going forward. So I think obviously the 3 back-to-back games, like almost the momentum from those kind of bled over because he was doing pretty good in the 2 games before the tournament. Mm-hmm. But I think once he has some downtime to kind of figure out what's going wrong and try to figure out how to make it go right, I think he'll be fine. I think he's going to get into the swing of things.
Mm-hmm. And over on the women's side, what players would you guys like to see more out of? Because I know there's a lot of people, I think, especially off the bench and maybe a couple people in the starting lineup that has really kind of that was a detriment in those 2 games in Las Vegas.
Well, I think I might have mentioned her last week as a player to hopefully she could bounce back, but still Ariana Jackson. She started off the season replacing Emily Ryan in the starting lineup, but as it's late, even in the tournament in Vegas, she didn't play in the starting lineup. And I think the issue with her is she's just not getting enough shots up. You see her taking 3, 4, maybe even lucky to get 5 shot attempts up. I just think she just needs to really push the ball more and attempt more shots, and I think that could help her a lot.
Yeah, I think too the problem that AJ's having is that the shots aren't falling either. I mean, she hasn't gotten past 10 points per game. She's lucky sometimes to make 1 shot a game. So it's it sucks to see that she is getting taken out of the starting lineup at times, but it's a decision that Bill has to make and he has made. And I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to knock her all the way off, but I guess St. Thomas yesterday too. She had a really good game where she actually made a bigger defensive presence. She got 4 steals against St. Thomas, which is really helpful on the defensive side. And obviously the team played well defensively, but I think she led the way with obviously 4 steals.
Yeah, definitely a good stat right there. And I think, too, the thing that is hurting Iowa State the most with the guard play is obviously, like you said, the loss of Emily Ryan, and hope that she's doing well and that she can come back soon because her presence is definitely missed right now, and it's definitely going to be needed later on in the season. But I think another player that I want to kind of point out is senior Hannah Bellinger. I mean, against Southern, she had a really good bounce-back game, made nearly 50% of her shots, but then she goes to the tournament and struggles and then loses her starting position for the St. Thomas game. So it's going to be, can she bounce back in her senior year? And Bill's talked about it before we're going to see the freshmen have a bigger impact, and I think that now we're starting to see that bigger impact of the freshmen.
Mm-hmm. And I think the last person I wanted to point out who is also a freshman who we kind of expected to have a really good, maybe not only start to the season, but after the last game before the tournament, maybe have a good presence at the tournament, was Omaha Baloo. Obviously, not sure what's really going on with him. It just kind of seems like he's not really vibing too well when he's on the court. Obviously, he's a great teammate, a great person. Everybody speaks highly of him. He loves Iowa State, but there's just times where it almost seems like he's just out there doing cardio, just not really doing much. But, obviously with a freshman, you just I think there's just growing pains in that.
Yeah, and I think he's going to get compared a lot to Milan, who has found success, but they play 2 completely different roles. You're looking for Omaha to be this, guy in the paint. He's getting rebounds. He's pushing the ball in there, getting scores. Maybe he's taking a couple shots from outside, which I don't know actually if we've seen an Omaha Blue 3-point attempt yet, which he has apparently in high school. He hit a few of those, but regardless, I think really for him it's just adjusting into that role. And I think he really does need to look up to guys like Trey King and Robert Jones, who, he obviously talent-wise, he's probably more talented than them, but they are guys that have played 5 years, 4 or 5 years of NCAA basketball, and he can just take these games as learning from them, and then he really just needs to have another game like he did against, Idaho State, yes, where he was really good offensively. And I think what they will probably try and do with him more is use him more in transition, because I think that's what he did really well was, they were pushing the ball and then you kind of find Omaha down there, or really just finding him shots down by the baseline. I think he can really use his size there. But regardless, I think he's probably going to get a lot of criticism for not having big numbers, unlike Milan, who's been pretty solid. But I think what a lot of people have to understand is he plays a different role, and, he has a lot of pressure on him. Like you said, great guy. What we've heard, he's been awesome in practice with teammates. It's just all about putting that on the floor.
Mm-hmm. And he is a high energy player too. I think one thing he needs to do is kind of slow the game down a little more. We saw him slow it down against Idaho State, which he talked about, which is why he did so well in that game. And I think a lot of times he's almost moving too fast for himself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just not the play style that Iowa State plays. I think he does really good on defense, and obviously that's going to give you minutes because TJ focuses on defense. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing to worry about on that side of the ball. I think he'll just kind of settle into his role on the offense at some point. He's never going to be that, hit 6 threes a game like Milan, but he still has chances when he's out there, and I think he will have meaningful minutes in the future.
And a lot of these guys that we talked about have a big opportunity on Friday to have a bounce-back game against DePaul, who's 1-5. They've played some tough competition, but some things that stick out to me, they're shooting mid-30s from three, which, Iowa State hasn't really done great either, but Iowa State's defended they've defended the three well overall this season, and DePaul has had averaged 14 turnovers a game, which if you're Iowa State, you're kind of licking your lips at that and looking at a bounce-back game, which I'm sure they'd all like to have. Mm-hmm.
Especially with those turnovers. I think Iowa State really feeds off just those maybe negative plays from the opponents. TJ talked about stacking up positive plays, and I think that starts with being able to stop the other team from having their positive plays. And DePaul sitting at 1-5, I think this is a good opportunity for them to come back and get a good win, especially on the road against an opponent.
Road game.
Yeah. So this should be a really good, maybe not tester for them, but a really good just understanding point of where they're at currently.
Because they'll need to get that momentum back before they take on Iowa, who, as always, has a great offense that they are going to have to go head-to-toe with. Looks like they could be capable of doing that, but they have to prove. I think they have to prove to themselves that they're capable of doing that.
Yeah, and they do host Iowa, which should give them some advantage, but obviously they can't just mark that in yet as a win because they need to show that they have the capability to beat a solid team, which, they did beat VCU, but we also saw them struggle quite a bit against Power 5 opponents.
They struggled in all the games in the tournament. So, and like I said, you've seen every facet of basketball where you can lose games, and it's all just about learning from that.
Yep. Now we just need to see all the facets where they win games. And then moving on to the women's side, what do we have to look forward to?
So Sunday, Iowa State travels back to Ames to finally host another game. They play UNCW, and just like what the men's side is talking about with DePaul, they're not looking very good. 2-4 overall. They just beat Winthrop by an overtime in a close game, but after that, besides that, they were on a 4-game losing streak. So, and also they struggle with the turnover ball, just like Iowa State has, and they should take advantage at home again.
Yeah, this is just going to be another confidence booster, really. This time it's just going to be at home, so hopefully another big performance for Iowa State, especially right before heading into the gauntlet, the Iowa game, Caitlin Clark, and all of that.
Yeah, it's like everyone's waiting for the Caitlin Clark show. Luckily, it'll be in Ames, so it should be a good show. But obviously, the number one priority for Iowa State, if they want to have a slim chance to win, is just stopping Caitlin Clark. At times, it just seems like teams have to double team, even triple team her to try and even slightly have a chance to stop her. Like, she's been an unbelievable player, averaging almost 30 a game. And yeah, I mean, luckily it's in Ames. Hopefully, the energy will be loud at Hilton, and just hopefully get stopped or keep it close at least with Caitlin Clark and the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, I mean, you look at her performance against Virginia Tech, a top 10 team. She scores over half the points for the Hawkeyes. Obviously, she's the number one player that the Cyclones are going to have to stop, and it's going to be tough. And it's going to be, I'd say, a good test for Iowa State, too, because you've played Power 5 schools like Vanderbilt, like Syracuse, or, they're solid teams, but now this is going to be the toughest test for the season for Iowa State. And you look at Iowa, too. They're scoring over 90 points per game. Their offense is just elite. And they've also played Drake, like Iowa State. Iowa State couldn't get it done. Iowa beats them by 23, so a little bit of a similarity there in one common opponent.
Yeah, so I guess all we can really do is just wait for these final non-con games to play out and look forward to the Cyhawk matchups, which on both sides should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think in both games you're going to learn a lot about each team. And honestly, when I was looking back at what Iowa State's going to need to make it Cyclone State for the third straight year, they're going to need both of these wins for that. So for anyone looking at that, you should be watching both of these games, which I think are going to be entertaining regardless. I think it's going to be hard to stop Caitlin Clark, but also Iowa State, I want to say they won last time that Caitlin Clark came to Ames 2 years ago.
However, she has been significantly better over the last 2 years, which is a little scary.
A little scarier.
Might be a tall task for.
And Iowa State had Ashley Jones.
Yes, they still have a Jones.
They have a Jones,
but not an Ashley Jones.
Every team has a Jones. We got 2 Jones.
Oh, that's true. A lot of Joneses at Iowa State. But anyways, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Thank you guys for watching, and join us back next week when we recap some more basketball fun.